This is a report on St. Paul's letter to the Philippians by Nelson Gravarin and Nadia St. Thomas. St. Paul wrote his letter to the Philippians while in captivity in Rome between AD 62 and AD 64. His main purposes for writing this letter was to warn the Philippians against those who mutilate the flesh, which refers to the Judaizers, to express gratitude for the Philippians' support and generosity while he was in prison, and to build up the faith of the Philippi converts and remind them of the ways of Christ. The letter of St. Paul to the Philippians describes how much Paul loves and longs to fill the Philippi Christians with knowledge and insight so that they may become pure in the eyes of God. In his letter, St. Paul references the selfish ambition, arrogance, and pride that had taken root amongst the people of Philippi and had caused them to no longer be of the same mind or having the same love. He advises the Philippians to let their worship for Christ's incarnation, obedience, acceptance of the human condition, and his dying on the cross guide their hearts away from their quarrel and arrogance. Paul also calls the Philippians to imitate him and his realization that there is a greater value to knowing Christ that surpasses all else. The main theme of St. Paul's letter to the Philippians is spiritual joy and rejoicing in Christ. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 26, Paul says, "That your rejoicing may abound in Christ Jesus for me, by my coming to you again." This shows that Paul's main hope for the Philippians was that they would find joy in Jesus through his letter. Paul's letter was meant to instruct the Philippians to live joyously even in the midst of life's difficulties. Paul knew the Philippians were facing problems against the ruthless Judaizers who tried to convince the Philippi converts it was necessary to be Jewish before becoming Christian. Nevertheless, he tells them in Philippians chapter 3, verse 4, to rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice, to help them build up their faith in Christ and find joy and peace in their lives. St. Paul also said, "Not that I complain of want, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. In any and all circumstances I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and want." Paul is telling the Philippians that they must find joy in Christ and in his plan for them in both the good times and bad. Joy is an essential part of the Catholic faith. Joy in Christ while enduring changes is what we are obliged to do as practicing Catholics. Pope John Paul II called for a new evangelization, which consisted of recommitting to Christ as individuals and sharing our love for him and his church with others. He said the only way to fully commit to Christ is by obtaining joy and rejoicing in the message of the gospel. Our Catholic belief that God is responsible for all the works that occurs in our lives for our own benefit is the absolute foundation for joy. Therefore, our faith in God and his plan for us directly corresponds to our own joy. Once we obtain joy, we are called by the Church to continue to practice this joy in Christ by living by his example and sharing his good news with others.